Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It was a typical night, and I was driving home after a long day at work. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and empty. As I drove, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, their thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. I hesitated for a moment, but then I remembered all those horror movies where the hitchhiker turns out to be a psycho killer, and I figured I was being silly. So, I pulled over and rolled down the window, asking the person if they needed a ride. They nodded eagerly and climbed into the car, thanking me profusely for stopping. At first, everything seemed fine. We exchanged small talk as I drove, with the person telling me about where they were headed and why they were out so late. But then, things started to get weird. The person became increasingly jittery, fidgeting in their seat and glancing around nervously as if they were expecting something to jump out at them at any moment. I tried to ignore it and keep the conversation going, but it was clear that something was off. And then, out of nowhere, the person reached into their pocket and pulled out a knife, holding it up to my throat with a manic gleam in their eyes. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that I had made a terrible mistake by picking up this hitchhiker. They started ranting and raving, talking about how they were going to kill me and take my car, their words coming out in a jumble of madness that made no sense. I tried to reason with them, pleading for my life and promising that I would do whatever they wanted if they would just let me go. But they just laughed and pressed the knife harder against my throat, drawing blood. I was sure that I was going to die, that this was the end for me. But then, in a moment of desperation, I saw my chance and I took it. I slammed on the brakes, sending the car screeching to a halt as I grabbed for the knife, struggling with the hitchhiker in a frantic battle for my life. It was a blur of motion and adrenaline, with me fighting tooth and nail to survive as the hitchhiker tried to overpower me and take control of the car. But in the end, I managed to wrestle the knife away from them and I stabbed them in the arm, causing them to scream in pain and recoil. With one final burst of strength, I pushed them out of the car and sped off into the night, leaving them bleeding and broken on the side of the road. I drove as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the nearest police station and reported what had happened. They took my statement and sent out a search party to find the hitchhiker, but as far as I know, they were never caught. To this day, I still can't believe what happened. It was like something out of a nightmare, and it's a miracle that I made it out alive. I was driving through rural Texas, tired and just wanting to get to my destination. I wasn't paying much attention to the GPS, and before I knew it, I had taken a wrong turn down a deserted dirt road. The road seemed to go on forever, winding its way through empty fields and past abandoned buildings. I kept driving, hoping to find a turnoff or a sign that would lead me back to the main highway. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a dilapidated farmhouse sitting at the end of a long driveway. It looked like something out of a horror movie, with broken windows and a sagging roof. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to turn around and keep looking for the main road or to stop and ask for directions. In the end, I figured it couldn't hurt to ask for help, so I pulled into the driveway and parked in front of the farmhouse. As I got out of the car and approached the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that washed over me. There was something about the place that just didn't feel right, like I was walking into danger without even knowing it. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for someone to answer. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man standing in the doorway. He had a menacing look about him, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I tried to smile and ask for directions, but the words caught in my throat as I felt a wave of fear wash over me. The man just stared at me for a moment, his expression unreadable, before finally speaking in a low, gravelly voice. He told me that I was trespassing on private property and that I needed to leave immediately. I tried to explain that I was just lost and looking for the main road, but he wasn't having any of it. He told me that if I didn't leave right away, there would be consequences. I didn't want to argue with him, so I turned and hurried back to my car, feeling his eyes boring into my back as I drove away from the farmhouse as fast as I could. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was like I had stumbled upon something sinister, something that I was never meant to see. I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on finding my way back to the main road, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of another car coming up behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the same man from the farmhouse behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on me with a look of pure hatred. I panicked and floored the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to outrun him. But no matter how fast I drove, he stayed right on my tail, his car bumping against mine as he tried to force me off the road. I knew I was in serious trouble, that this man meant to do me harm. I had to think fast if I wanted to get out of this alive. In a moment of desperation, I swerved off the road and into the surrounding fields, hoping to lose him in the darkness. I drove as fast as I could, the headlights of his car fading into the distance as I raced through the night. And then, finally, I saw it, the main highway, stretching out in front of me like a beacon of hope. I floored the gas pedal one last time, my heart racing as I sped towards safety. I made it to the highway just as the first rays of dawn began to light up the sky, my hands shaking as I pulled over to the side of the road and took a deep breath. I had lost him and was finally safe. I think I stayed there for about 20 minutes before heading off to the police station to report what had happened. It was supposed to be a routine drive home, but fate had other plans for me that night. My car sputtered and died on a deserted stretch of highway, leaving me stranded in the darkness with no one around for miles. Panic started to bubble up inside me as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was alone, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of whoever happened to come along. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. Relief flooded through me as a car pulled up beside mine, and a man stepped out, offering to help. He seemed friendly enough, with a reassuring smile and a calm demeanor that put me at ease. Desperate for assistance, I accepted his offer without hesitation, grateful for any help I could get. But as he tinkered under the hood of my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, a sense of unease that lingered just beneath the surface. I tried to push aside my doubts, chalking it up to nerves and exhaustion, but the feeling only grew stronger with each passing moment. As the stranger worked on my car, he started asking probing questions, delving into personal details that made me uncomfortable. Alarm bells started going off in my head, warning me to be cautious, but I ignored them, too polite to refuse his help. I just wanted to get back on the road and put this nightmare behind me. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the stranger's demeanor changed. His smile turned sinister, his eyes cold and calculating as he revealed his true intentions. He wasn't here to help me, he was here to take advantage of my vulnerability and exploit me for his own gain. Fear gripped me as I realized the danger I was in. I was alone with a stranger on a deserted highway, with no one around to hear my cries for help. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was trapped, with no way out and no one to turn to for help. The stranger's grip tightened on my arm, his voice low and menacing as he threatened me with violence if I didn't comply with his demands. Desperate for escape, I searched frantically for a way out, my heart pounding in my chest as adrenaline surged through my veins. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw my chance. With a surge of strength born from sheer terror, I broke free from the stranger's grasp and bolted for the safety of my car. I didn't look back as I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. With trembling fingers, I turned the ignition and prayed for the engine to roar to life. And miraculously, it did, the car lurching forward as I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and peeled out of there as fast as I could. I was driving down a desolate stretch of road, the radio playing softly in the background, when I heard it, a faint voice crackling over the CB radio. It was a man's voice, pleading for help, saying his car had broken down and he was stranded on the side of the road. At first, I hesitated, wondering if I should stop and help. But something about the man's voice tugged at my heartstrings, and against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I pulled over to the side of the road and grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. As I stepped out of the car and approached the spot where the voice was coming from, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that washed over me. The area was deserted, with nothing but empty fields stretching out in all directions. There was no sign of any stranded motorist, no car parked on the side of the road. But then, just as I was about to turn back and get back in my car, I saw it. A figure emerging from the shadows, a deranged look in his eyes as he stepped into the beam of my flashlight. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I had walked right into a trap. The man was clearly not stranded. He was waiting for someone to come along, someone like me, unsuspecting and vulnerable. I tried to run, but it was too late. The man was upon me in an instant, his hands grabbing hold of me and dragging me back towards his car, which was parked just out of sight behind a stand of trees. I struggled and fought with all my might, but the man was strong, too strong. He shoved me into the back seat of his car and climbed in after me, a twisted smile on his face as he started the engine and drove off into the night. I was trapped, with no way to escape. I didn't know what the man had planned for me, but I knew it couldn't be anything good. As we drove deeper into the darkness, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I didn't know where we were going or what the man intended to do to me, but I knew I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. I searched desperately for anything I could use as a weapon, but there was nothing in the car except for a few empty soda cans and some old newspapers. I racked my brain, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare, but every plan I came up with seemed doomed to fail. The man was too strong, too cunning, and I was no match for him. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I couldn't believe my luck as I realized that help was on the way, that I might actually have a chance to escape. I pounded on the windows and screamed for help as loudly as I could, praying that someone would hear me and come to my rescue. And then, miraculously, I saw the flashing lights of a police car up ahead, pulling the man over and forcing him to stop. I couldn't believe it as I watched the officers pull the man out of the car and arrest him, his twisted smile fading into a look of pure terror as he realized his reign of terror was finally over. I stumbled out of the car and into the arms of the officers, tears streaming down my face as I realized that I was finally safe, that I had escaped from the clutches of a madman. As I sat in the back of the police car, watching the man being led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew I would never forget the terror of that night, but I also knew that I had survived, that I had made it out alive. It was a quiet night, and I was driving alone on a deserted stretch of road, lost in my thoughts. That's when I saw him, a man standing by the side of the road, illuminated by the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. He was dressed in dark robes, his face hidden in the shadows, but there was something about him that drew me in, a magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down my window to get a better look. The man turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the darkness, and beckoned me closer with a wave of his hand. There was something hypnotic about his gaze, something that made my heart race with excitement and fear. I stepped out of my car and approached him cautiously, unsure of what to expect. He greeted me with a warm smile, his voice smooth and persuasive as he invited me to join him for a late-night sermon. Intrigued by his charisma, I accepted his offer, eager to see what he had to say. As I listened to the preacher's sermon, I was captivated by his words, drawn in by his persuasive rhetoric and compelling storytelling. But as the night wore on, his sermon took a dark turn, his words dripping with venom as he preached about sin and damnation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that something wasn't right. The preacher's demeanor had changed, his once charming smile replaced by a look of fanaticism and madness. And as I looked around me, I saw that I was surrounded by a group of people, their eyes glazed over with fervor as they hung on his every word. Panic surged through me as I realized that I had stumbled upon a gathering of cultists, their dangerous intentions hidden beneath a facade of religious fervor. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The preacher's voice echoed in my ears, a cacophony of madness and malice that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the eyes of the cultists boring into me, their silent judgment weighing heavy on my soul. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled into the darkness. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was safely back in my car, the engine roaring to life as I peeled out of there as fast as I could. I got out safe, but it will always haunt me. I was driving down a dark, deserted highway, the only sounds the hum of my engine and the soft roar of the air conditioner. It was late, and I was tired, but I still had a long way to go before I reached my destination. Suddenly, nature called, and I realized I couldn't hold it any longer. I scanned the horizon for any signs of life, and that's when I saw it, an old, abandoned rest stop nestled among the trees. I pulled off the road and parked my car, feeling a sense of unease wash over me as I stepped out into the cool night air. The rest stop looked like something straight out of a horror movie, with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. Ignoring my growing sense of dread, I made my way towards the entrance, the only source of light coming from the moon overhead. The door creaked open on rusty hinges, and I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. I fumbled for the light switch, but when I flipped it on, the bulbs flickered and died, leaving me standing in darkness. I cursed under my breath and pulled out my phone, using its dim glow to navigate my way through the gloom. As I made my way down the corridor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to conceal some unseen threat, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat. I reached the end of the hallway and pushed open the door to the bathroom, relief flooding through me at the sight of the empty stalls. But as I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I heard a noise that froze me in place, the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway outside. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't alone in the rest stop. Someone, or something, was out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to stay calm as I finished my business and washed my hands, but my mind was racing with fear. Who, or what, was out there, and what did they want with me? I took a deep breath and forced myself to step out of the bathroom, my senses on high alert as I scanned the corridor for any signs of movement. But all I saw was darkness, the only sound the pounding of my heart in my ears. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next, when suddenly, I heard it, a low growl emanating from the shadows. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. I wasn't alone in the rest stop, and whatever was out there was hungry for blood. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. And that's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the far end of the corridor. I froze, my mind racing as I tried to come up with a plan. I knew I had to get out of there, but the thought of facing whatever was lurking in the darkness filled me with terror. But then, just as I was about to turn and run, I heard another sound, the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I spun around just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized I was trapped between two predators, both hungry for my flesh. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. With a burst of adrenaline, I bolted down the corridor, my footsteps echoing off the walls as I ran for my life. Behind me, I could hear the sound of pursuit, the growls and snarls of my would-be attackers getting closer with every passing second. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I raced towards the exit. I could see the door up ahead, its outline illuminated by the faint light of the moon, and I knew I had to reach it before it was too late. With one final burst of speed, I threw myself through the doorway and out into the night, the cool air washing over me like a wave of relief. But my joy was short-lived, as I realized I was still not safe. I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of help, when suddenly, I heard the sound of engines revving in the distance. I turned to see a group of headlights approaching from the road, their beams cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. With a sense of relief flooding through me, I stumbled towards the approaching vehicles, waving my arms and shouting for help. And as they drew nearer, I could see the figures of people inside, their faces filled with concern and confusion. I collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down my face as I realized I had made it out alive. The people from the vehicles rushed to my side, offering me water and comfort as they called for help. And as I sat there, surrounded by strangers, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night, but I also knew that I had survived, that I had made it out of the rest stop alive. And for that, I would be forever grateful. I was driving home late one night, tired and eager to get back to the comfort of my own bed. The highway was deserted. I was just listening to music and drinking a Red Bull to keep myself awake. That's when it happened. I accidentally cut off another driver while changing lanes, and before I knew it, we were locked in a heated confrontation. The other driver honked furiously and flashed their headlights, clearly angered by my mistake. I tried to apologize, but they weren't having it. They swerved dangerously close to my car, their eyes filled with rage as they screamed obscenities at me through the window. Tensions escalated quickly, and I knew I had to get away from this person before things got out of hand. I hit the gas, hoping to put some distance between us, but the other driver wasn't about to let me off that easily. They started tailgating me, driving dangerously close to my bumper as if they were trying to intimidate me into submission. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was being followed, that this person wasn't going to let me go without a fight. I tried to lose them, taking sharp turns and doubling back on myself in a desperate attempt to shake them off my trail. But no matter what I did, they were always right behind me, their headlights looming ominously in my rearview mirror. As the minutes ticked by, the situation grew more and more dire. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as I struggled to stay calm under the pressure. The other drivers seemed relentless, their determination to catch me sending shivers down my spine. I knew I had to think fast, to come up with a plan to escape before it was too late. With a surge of adrenaline, I made a split-second decision and veered off the highway onto a deserted side road. It was a risky move, but I hoped that the narrow, Winding lanes would give me the advantage I needed to lose my pursuer. I pushed my car to its limits, weaving in and out of the darkness as I raced through the night. The other driver was hot on my heels, their headlights blazing as they pursued me with single-minded determination. Fear gnawed at my insides as I realized that I was running out of options, that there was no way I could outrun them forever. I needed help, and fast, before things took a turn for the worse. I reached for my phone, my hand shaking with adrenaline as I dialed 911 and begged for assistance. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but I knew that it would be too late if I didn't find a way to hold out until then. Desperation fueled my actions as I continued to drive, my eyes darting frantically between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. I could hear the other driver's car gaining on me, their engine roaring with the thrill of the chase. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw the flashing lights of a police car up ahead, their presence a welcome relief in the darkness. With a sigh of relief, I pulled over and waited for them to catch up to me. The other driver didn't stop, didn't even slow down as they flew past me in a blur of speed. But it didn't matter anymore. I was safe, and that was all that mattered. As the police car pulled up beside me, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I thanked the officers profusely as they escorted me to safety, their presence a comforting reminder that I was no longer alone in the darkness. It took me a while to calm down after that ordeal, to shake off the fear and adrenaline that had consumed me during the chase. But eventually, I was able to relax, safe in the knowledge that I had escaped unscathed from a situation that could have ended much worse. As I drove home, the events of the night replayed themselves in my mind, a terrifying reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. I was driving down a lonely stretch of highway, the monotony of the road stretching out before me like an endless ribbon of asphalt. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. As I rounded a bend, I spotted a figure standing on the side of the road, their thumb extended in a classic hitchhiking gesture. At first, I hesitated, unsure whether to stop or not. But then, something inside me stirred, a sense of obligation, perhaps, or maybe just a desire to help a fellow traveler. I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down my window, calling out to the hitchhiker. They approached cautiously, their face obscured by the shadow of their hood. "Need a lift?" I asked, trying to sound friendly despite the unease that was creeping over me. The hitchhiker nodded gratefully and climbed into the passenger seat, their movements slow and deliberate. As they settled into the seat beside me, I caught a glimpse of their face, a face that seemed to be haunted by some unseen darkness. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the rush of wind through the open windows. I stole occasional glances at the hitchhiker, trying to gauge their mood, but their expression remained impassive. After a few minutes, I decided to break the silence. "So, where are you headed?" I asked, forcing a smile. The hitchhiker hesitated for a moment before responding. "Anywhere but here," they said, their voice low and gravelly. I didn't press the issue, sensing that they didn't want to talk about it. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was gnawing at the back of my mind. But then, as we rounded a bend in the road, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a police roadblock, with officers directing traffic ahead. Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. The hitchhiker must be running from the law, and I had unwittingly become an accomplice to their crime. I glanced over at the hitchhiker, but their expression remained unchanged. It was as if they knew what was coming and were prepared to face the consequences. As we approached the roadblock, I made a split-second decision. I veered off the road and onto a dirt track that led into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed that we could outrun the police. The hitchhiker didn't protest, their silence adding to the growing sense of dread that was consuming me. I pushed the car to its limits, navigating the narrow track with a desperation born of fear. But just as I thought we might make it, disaster struck. The car hit a patch of loose gravel and skidded off the road, crashing through the underbrush and coming to a jarring halt against a tree. I groaned as pain shot through my body, my head spinning from the impact. But there was no time to dwell on my injuries. I had to get us out of there before the police caught up with us. I turned to the hitchhiker, ready to demand answers, but they were already moving, slipping out of the car and disappearing into the darkness of the forest. I hesitated for a moment, torn between following them and staying with the car. But then, I heard the sound of approaching sirens, and I knew I had no choice but to flee into the woods. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my ears as I tried to put as much distance between myself and the roadblock as possible. The forest seemed to stretch out endlessly before me, its shadows concealing who knew what horrors. I pressed on, driven by fear and desperation, until finally, I stumbled upon a small clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the hitchhiker, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, unsure of what to do next. But then, the hitchhiker spoke, their voice low and menacing. "You shouldn't have picked me up, Sarah," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "Now, you're going to pay for your mistake." I backed away slowly, my mind racing with fear. I had to get out of there, had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But as I turned to run, I felt a sudden pressure on my chest, like a weight pressing down on me from above. I gasped for breath, my vision swimming as I struggled to stay conscious. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the forest floor, the sun shining down through the trees above. My head was pounding, and my body ached all over, but I was alive. I stumbled to my feet, my mind still reeling from the events of the night before. What had happened to the hitchhiker? And more importantly, what had they done to me? But as I limped back to the road, I realized that I would probably never know the answers to those questions. All I knew was that I had narrowly escaped a brush with death, and that I would never pick up another hitchhiker again. My car broke down near this old graveyard out in the boonies. It was late, and there wasn't a soul in sight. I was waiting for roadside assistance when this guy pulled up out of nowhere. Seemed friendly enough, offering to help me out. I thought, why not? So, I hopped into his car. But then things got weird real quick. Instead of heading towards my car, he drove straight to this rundown church nearby. I started feeling uneasy, but I didn't want to make a scene. When we got there, he dragged me out of the car and into the church. Inside, it was dark and musty, and I could barely see a thing. I tried to make a run for it, but he caught me and dragged me further inside. I could hear chanting, and my heart was pounding like crazy. I managed to break free and bolted towards the door, but it was locked from the outside. I was trapped. Panic started setting in, and I didn't know what to do. I could hear footsteps getting closer, and I knew I had to think fast if I wanted to get out of there alive. I found a small window near the back of the church and smashed it with my elbow. Glass shattered everywhere, but I didn't care. I squeezed through the opening, cutting myself in the process, and tumbled out onto the ground outside. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I finally flagged down a passing car for help. I told them everything that happened, and they called the cops. The police searched the area but couldn't find any sign of the guy or the church. It was like he vanished into thin air. I still have nightmares about that night, and I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting for his next victim. I was driving down a long stretch of highway, on a long trip to visit my sister. It was late and my gas gauge was hovering dangerously close to empty, so when I spotted a small, rundown gas station up ahead, I breathed a sigh of relief. Pulling into the gravel lot, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. The station looked abandoned, with faded paint and boarded-up windows giving it an air of neglect. Despite my misgivings, I had no choice but to stop and refuel. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out of the car, the hot sun beating down on me as I made my way to the pump. As I filled up my tank, I glanced around the empty lot, feeling a shiver run down my spine. There was something off about this place, something that made my skin crawl. With a sense of trepidation, I headed inside to pay, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead casting eerie shadows on the grimy walls. I approached the counter cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind the counter stood a man, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if he were expecting trouble. "Hi there," I said, trying to sound casual despite the growing sense of unease that was gnawing at me. The man glanced up at me, his expression unreadable. "Fill her up?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, handing him my credit card with trembling hands. He took it without a word, his eyes never leaving mine as he processed the transaction. As I waited for him to finish, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. There was an air of menace about the man, a sense that he was hiding something sinister beneath his facade of indifference. Just then, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Glancing towards the window, I saw a group of shadowy figures lurking outside, their faces hidden beneath hooded sweatshirts. My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. This gas station was a front for some kind of criminal operation, and I had stumbled right into the lion's den. I turned to make a run for it, but it was too late. The man behind the counter had finished processing my payment and was now blocking the door, a malevolent gleam in his eyes. "Leaving so soon?" he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. I backed away slowly, my mind racing as I tried to come up with a plan. But before I could make a move, the door burst open and the hooded figures stormed inside, their faces contorted with rage. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was completely outnumbered. There was no way I could fight my way out of this. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest as the men closed in on me. I glanced around desperately, searching for a way out, but the windows were boarded up and the door was blocked. As the men advanced, I felt a surge of panic welling up inside me. I was trapped, with no way to escape. But then, just as it seemed like all hope was lost, I spotted a glint of metal on the floor. It was a crowbar, discarded by one of the men in their haste to corner me. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the crowbar, my fingers closing around the cool metal. I swung it wildly, striking out at my attackers with all the strength I could muster. The men recoiled in surprise, giving me just enough time to make a break for it. I darted towards the door, ducking under their outstretched arms and sprinting out into the blinding sunlight. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled for the keys. With shaking hands, I started the engine and peeled out of the gas station lot, leaving the nightmare behind me. As I drove away, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me feeling shaken and exhausted. But I was alive, and that was all that mattered. I must have been the only car on the road for miles. The sun was setting, casting shadows across the road as I cruised along, lost in thought. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a car appeared behind me, its headlights blinding me in the rearview mirror. I tensed up, my heart pounding in my chest as the car came closer, its engine roaring. Before I could react, the car pulled up alongside me, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as I came to a stop on the side of the road. My hands were shaking as I watched in horror as a group of masked figures emerged from the car, brandishing weapons and shouting threats. "Give us your money and valuables," one of them growled, his voice muffled by the mask he wore. I knew I had to think fast if I wanted to survive. I glanced around frantically, searching for a way out of this nightmare. Then, an idea struck me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet, tossing it out of the window towards the robbers. As they scrambled to pick up the wallet, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and tore off down the highway, leaving them in the dust. But my relief was short-lived. I could see the headlights of their car gaining on me in the rearview mirror, the sound of their engine roaring in my ears. I pushed my car to its limits, weaving in and out of traffic as I tried to put as much distance between us as possible. Just when I thought I had lost them, I heard a loud bang from behind me. Glancing in the mirror, I saw one of the robbers leaning out of the window, aiming a gun at my car. Bullets whizzed past me, shattering my rear windshield and sending glass flying everywhere. I ducked down behind the wheel, praying that I wouldn't be hit. But luck was on my side. The bullets missed their mark, and I was able to keep driving, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced towards safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of a police car up ahead. I swerved off the highway and pulled up alongside the patrol car, waving frantically for help. The officers sprang into action, jumping out of their car with their guns drawn as they approached me cautiously. I rolled down my window and explained what had happened, my words coming out in a rush as I tried to convey the terror of the ordeal. The officers listened intently, their expressions grim as they took in the details of the attack. They assured me that they would do everything in their power to catch the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Relief washed over me as I watched the officers drive off into the night, their sirens blaring as they raced to track down the robbers. I knew that I was lucky to have escaped with my life, but the memory of that harrowing encounter would haunt me for years to come. I had been on the road for hours. The only sounds was the occasional radio station fading in and out of reception. As I rounded a bend, I saw something up ahead that made my heart skip a beat. There, blocking the road, was a makeshift barricade constructed from old crates and barrels. And standing behind it were several figures, armed and looking at me with cold, unyielding eyes. I slowed to a stop, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I tried to make sense of what was happening. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them were good. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was no one behind me. I was alone, trapped on this desolate road with nowhere to go. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized the gravity of the situation. These people weren't here to help me. They were here to harm me, or worse. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to get out of this alive. I shifted the car into reverse and slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, praying that I could outmaneuver them and escape. But as I tried to turn the car around, I realized that it was too late. More figures had emerged from the shadows, surrounding me on all sides and cutting off any chance of escape. I was trapped, a helpless prey in the clutches of my predators. My heart hammered in my chest as I racked my brain for a way out of this nightmare. Then, as if on cue, one of the figures stepped forward, a malicious glint in their eyes as they raised their weapon and pointed it in my direction. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of pulling the trigger, the figure spoke, their voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Get out of the car," they commanded, their words sending a chill down my spine. I knew I had no choice but to obey. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle and slowly pushed it open, stepping out of the safety of my car and into the unknown. As I stood there, surrounded by armed strangers, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I didn't know what they wanted from me, but I knew it couldn't be anything good. But just as I was bracing myself for the worst, something unexpected happened. One of the figures stepped forward, their expression softening as they motioned for me to follow them. "Come with us," they said, their voice surprisingly gentle. "We can help you." I hesitated for a moment, torn between my instinct to flee and the small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, these people weren't as dangerous as they seemed. In the end, desperation won out over caution, and I followed the figure into the darkness, praying that I was making the right decision. As we walked, the tension in the air was palpable, each step heavier than the last as we made our way deeper into the unknown. But just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, we reached a clearing, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the clearing, was a group of people, all armed and watching me with wary eyes. And at their head stood a man, his face hidden behind a mask as he regarded me with a calculating gaze. I knew then that I had stumbled into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. These people weren't just a group of bandits looking for an easy score. They were something else entirely, something dark and dangerous. But despite the fear coursing through my veins, I refused to give up hope. I knew that as long as I was still breathing, there was still a chance for me to escape. And so, with every ounce of strength I had left, I squared my shoulders and prepared to fight for my life. As the tension reached its peak, I scanned the clearing for any sign of a way out. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to keep my breathing steady, not wanting to show any weakness to these ruthless strangers. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. It was a small gap in the trees, barely visible in the dim light of the clearing. Without a second thought, I made a split-second decision. With a burst of adrenaline, I broke into a sprint, darting towards the opening in the trees with all the speed I could muster. Bullets whizzed past me, kicking up dirt and leaves as I dodged and weaved through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear the shouts of my pursuers, their anger fueling their determination to catch me. But I refused to let them win. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain in my lungs and the burning in my muscles as I ran for my life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst through the trees and into the open air. I stumbled and fell to the ground, gasping for breath as I looked around wildly, searching for any sign of danger. But all I saw was the peaceful stillness of the forest, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. I had made it out alive, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to keep moving, keep putting as much distance between myself and those people as possible. With that thought in mind, I picked myself up off the ground and forced myself to keep going. Every step was agony, but I pushed through the pain, driven by the need to survive. For hours, I stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the faint glow of the moon overhead. I didn't know where I was going or what lay ahead, but I knew I couldn't stop until I was safe. Finally, just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a glimmer of light up ahead. It was the main road, the same one I had been driving on before all of this had happened. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards the road, my legs shaking with exhaustion. I didn't know what I would do next or where I would go, but for now, all that mattered was that I was free. As I reached the road, I collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down my face as the magnitude of what had just happened hit me. I had been moments away from death, and yet somehow, I had managed to escape. I spotted a child standing by the side of the road, looking lost and vulnerable. Without hesitation, I pulled over, my heart going out to them. As I approached, I noticed something unsettling about their demeanor, a hint of something not quite right. "Hey there, are you okay?" I called out, trying to sound reassuring. The child turned to me with wide, innocent eyes, but there was something off about their expression, a glint of mischief that sent a shiver down my spine. Ignoring my unease, I asked if they needed help finding their parents. Instead of answering, the child just smiled, a smile that didn't reach their eyes. Alarm bells rang in my head, but before I could react, they lunged at me, their tiny hands clawing at my arms with surprising strength. With a gasp, I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I realized the danger I was in. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I fought to break free from their grasp. Summoning all my strength, I managed to push the child away and scrambled to my feet. Without looking back, I sprinted to my car, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the child chasing after me. But there was no one there, just the empty road stretching out behind me. Relief washed over me as I realized that I had escaped their clutches. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something truly sinister. My hands were still shaking as I pulled onto the highway, the memory of the encounter haunting me long after I had left it behind. But for now, at least, I was safe. And as I drove into the night, I vowed never to stop for another stranger again. I was out for a drive one night, taking a shortcut through the old cemetery on the edge of town. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the wildlife. As I rounded a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the moonlight, I saw a group of shadowy figures huddled around a freshly dug grave, shovels in hand. At first, I thought maybe they were workers doing some late-night maintenance. But as I got closer, I realized that something was off. These people weren't here to tend to the graves. They were here to rob them. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. These were grave robbers, and I had stumbled upon them in the act. Before I could turn and run, one of the figures looked up and spotted me. With a shout, they alerted the others, and suddenly, I found myself surrounded. I didn't wait around to see what they would do next. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and bolted, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced through the cemetery, desperate to escape. Behind me, I could hear the sound of footsteps, growing louder with each passing second. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. As I ran, I dodged between headstones and vaults, praying that I could lose my pursuers in the maze of graves. But they were relentless, closing in on me with every step. I could hear their shouts echoing through the night, their voices filled with anger and menace. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I raced toward the safety of the cemetery gates. They were so close now, I could almost feel their hands reaching out to grab me. With one final burst of speed, I burst through the gates and out onto the street beyond. I didn't stop running until I was a safe distance away, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. I glanced back at the cemetery, half expecting to see my pursuers hot on my heels. But there was no one there, just the silent, empty graveyard bathed in moonlight. Relief flooded through me as I realized that I had escaped, that I was safe once more. But even as I caught my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. I knew that I had narrowly avoided a fate worse than death, that if those grave robbers had caught me, I might never have made it out alive. But for now, at least, I was free. And as I made my way home, I vowed never to take a shortcut through the cemetery again. I was driving home from work one evening when I witnessed something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. There was a loud screech of tires, followed by a sickening crash as two cars collided on the highway right in front of me. Instinct kicked in, and I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing as I ran towards the wreckage. Smoke billowed from the mangled cars, and the air was thick with the smell of burning rubber. As I got closer, I could see that one of the cars had flipped over, its roof crushed under the weight of the impact. I could hear the screams of the trapped passengers, and my stomach churned with dread as I realized that there was little time to spare. I rushed to the overturned car and tried to pry open the door, but it was stuck fast. I could hear the panicked cries of the people inside, pleading for help as they struggled to free themselves from the wreckage. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed a nearby rock and smashed it against the window, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. I reached inside and began pulling the injured passengers out one by one, doing my best to keep them calm as I worked to free them from the twisted metal. But as I pulled the last survivor from the wreckage, something caught my eye, a glint of metal tucked away in the back seat. My blood ran cold as I realized what it was, a gun, hidden from view beneath a pile of clothing. Fear gripped me as I looked around, my mind racing with the possibilities. Had this been an accident, or was there something more sinister at play? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong about the situation, something that didn't add up. As I helped the survivors to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. I knew I had to do something, to find out the truth about what had really happened on that highway. I called the police and reported the accident, telling them everything I had seen and heard. But even as I spoke to the dispatcher, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was more to this story than met the eye. Hours passed as I waited for the police to arrive, each minute feeling like an eternity as I replayed the events of that evening over and over again in my mind. What had caused the accident? And why did I feel like the survivors were hiding something from me? When the police finally arrived, I led them to the scene of the crash and recounted everything I had witnessed. But as they began to investigate, my worst fears were confirmed. The accident had been staged, a deliberate attempt to cover up a much darker crime. The survivors were taken into custody, their true intentions revealed as the police uncovered evidence of foul play hidden in the wreckage. It turned out that they had been involved in a robbery gone wrong, and the accident had been their desperate attempt to escape justice. As I watched them being led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had helped to uncover the truth, to bring those responsible to justice, and for that, I would always be grateful. But even as the ordeal came to an end, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. The thought that I had come so close to danger, that I had been just a heartbeat away from becoming another victim of their twisted plot, haunted me long after the police had left the scene. In the end, I couldn't help but wonder how many other accidents were nothing more than carefully orchestrated cover-ups for crimes too terrible to imagine. And would I ever be able to drive down that highway again without the memory of that fateful night flashing before my eyes? I was driving through the night, tired and in need of rest, when I spotted a rundown motel on the side of the road. With no other options in sight, I pulled into the parking lot and decided to spend the night there. As I stepped into the dimly lit lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that washed over me. There was something off about this place, something that sent shivers down my spine. But I ignored my instincts and checked in anyway, eager to get off the road and into a bed. The motel clerk gave me a key and pointed me toward my room, a small, dingy space at the end of a long hallway. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me. The room was musty and dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of mildew. But it was better than sleeping in my car, so I tried to push aside my reservations and make myself comfortable. As I settled into bed, I heard the sound of voices echoing through the thin walls. At first, I thought it was just the other guests, but as I listened closer, I realized that something wasn't right. The voices sounded wrong somehow, distorted and inhuman. And the more I listened, the more uneasy I became. I tried to drown out the noise and drift off to sleep, but every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the curtains sent a shiver down my spine. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I fell into a fitful slumber. But my rest was short-lived. In the dead of night, I was awoken by a loud banging on my door. Heart pounding, I stumbled out of bed and cautiously approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. But the banging grew louder and more insistent, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. With a deep breath, I flung the door open and came face to face with a group of shadowy figures, their faces obscured by darkness. For a moment, we stood there, staring at each other in silence. And then, without warning, they lunged forward, their hands reaching out to grab me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I scrambled to escape their grasp. But they were relentless, pursuing me down the hallway with single-minded determination. I ducked into an empty room and slammed the door shut behind me, my hand shaking as I fumbled to lock it. But even as I secured the door, I knew it wouldn't hold them for long. I needed to get out of there, and fast. With no other options left, I climbed out the window and onto the roof, praying that I could find a way to escape. As I crouched there, hidden in the darkness, I could hear the sounds of the motel coming to life below me. Doors slammed, voices shouted, and footsteps echoed through the night. But I dared not move, not until I was sure that it was safe. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity as I waited for dawn to break. And when it finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I had made it out alive. Carefully, I climbed down from the roof and made my way to my car, eager to put as much distance between myself and that accursed motel as possible. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what horrors lurked within those walls, what dark secrets the motel held. But one thing was for certain, I would never set foot in that place again. I was driving home from work late one night, tired and ready to just crawl into bed and forget about the day. But as I pulled onto the quiet street where I lived, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were two men standing by the side of the road, their faces hidden by dark hoodies and ski masks. Before I could react, one of them stepped out in front of my car, waving a gun in my face. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized what was happening. These guys were hijacking my car. They were going to take me somewhere and demand a ransom for my safe return. I felt a surge of panic as one of the men opened the door and yanked me out of the driver's seat, throwing me to the ground with a rough shove. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as they dragged me towards their waiting car, the cold metal of the gun pressing against my back. I tried to fight back, to scream for help, but the words caught in my throat as one of the men shoved me into the back seat of their car, slamming the door shut behind me. I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes as I realized that I was completely at their mercy. They had me trapped, and there was nothing I could do to escape. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window, trying to catch a glimpse of anything that could help me figure out where they were taking me. But all I could see was darkness, the streetlights flashing by in a blur as we sped down the empty road. I felt a surge of anger as I realized that these guys thought they could just take whatever they wanted, that they could treat me like some kind of object to be bought and sold. But beneath the anger, there was fear, a deep, gnawing fear that made my stomach churn and my hands shake. I didn't know what these guys were capable of, or what they might do to me if I tried to fight back. As the minutes ticked by, I tried to come up with a plan, to think of some way to escape before it was too late. But every time I tried to think, my mind felt foggy and confused, like I was swimming through molasses. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sounds of the car around me, the rumble of the engine, the low murmur of the men's voices as they talked in hushed tones. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow, whispering in my ear that I was never going to make it out of this alive. Suddenly, the car lurched to a stop, and I felt a surge of hope as I realized that this might be my chance to escape. But as the door swung open and one of the men grabbed me roughly by the arm, dragging me out onto the cold pavement, I knew that my nightmare was far from over. I stumbled along behind them, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to keep up. We were in some kind of industrial area now, with rows of abandoned warehouses stretching out in every direction. I felt a surge of panic as I realized that there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from these men who were determined to do me harm. But then, as we rounded a corner and I saw a glimmer of light up ahead, a surge of hope flooded through me. Maybe there was someone out there who could help me, someone who could save me from this nightmare. I opened my mouth to scream for help, but before I could make a sound, one of the men shoved me roughly to the ground, pressing his knee into my back and holding me there with all his weight. I could feel the cold metal of the gun pressing against the back of my head, and I knew that I was running out of time. If I didn't find a way to escape soon, I was as good as dead. But then, just as I was starting to lose hope, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The cavalry was coming to save me, just in the nick of time. With a surge of adrenaline, I twisted out from under the man's grip and scrambled to my feet, running as fast as I could towards the approaching lights. And as the police cars screeched to a stop in front of us and the officers jumped out, guns drawn, I knew that I was finally safe. I had survived. I had made it out of hell alive. It was late, and I was the only car on the road for miles. But as I rounded a bend, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the distance, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized what was happening. Someone was shooting at me, and I was completely exposed with nowhere to hide. I swerved the car to avoid the bullets, my hands shaking on the wheel as I tried to process what was happening. But the gunfire was relentless, each shot coming closer and closer to hitting its mark. Panic set in as I realized that I was completely vulnerable out here on the open road. There was no one around to help me, and nowhere to run. I knew I had to think fast if I wanted to survive. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I ducked down in my seat and pressed my foot down on the gas pedal, hoping to outrun the sniper's bullets. But it was no use. The gunfire followed me wherever I went, each shot coming perilously close to hitting its mark. I glanced in the rearview mirror, searching desperately for any sign of help. But all I saw was empty road stretching out behind me, the only sound the roar of the engine and the sharp crack of gunfire. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I was completely at the mercy of my attacker, with no way to defend myself or fight back. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, I refused to give up hope. With every fiber of my being, I clung to the belief that I could make it out of this alive. As the minutes stretched into hours, I grew more and more desperate. The sniper showed no sign of letting up, their gunfire relentless and unyielding. But just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw something up ahead that made my heart leap with hope. The flicker of lights in the distance, the telltale sign of civilization. With renewed determination, I pressed down on the gas pedal and raced toward the lights, praying that I could reach safety before it was too late. As I drew closer, I could see the outline of a small town on the horizon, its buildings bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. But even as I breathed a sigh of relief, I knew that the danger was far from over. The sniper could still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. With that thought weighing heavily on my mind, I pushed on, my eyes scanning the road ahead for any sign of danger. And then, just when I thought I was in the clear, I heard the sharp crack of gunfire once again, followed by the sickening sound of a bullet piercing metal. I swerved to avoid the shot, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought to keep control of the car. But even as I struggled to stay on the road, I knew that I couldn't give up. I had come too far to let myself be taken down now. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed on, the lights of the town growing closer with each passing second. And then, finally, I was there, pulling into the safety of the town limits with a sense of relief that I had never known before. As I climbed out of the car and collapsed onto the pavement, I knew that I had survived against all odds. And as I looked up at the stars shining down from above, I couldn't help but feel grateful for another chance at life. We had just left my cousin's wedding, the night air cool against our skin as we piled into the car for the long drive home. The music from the reception still echoed in our ears as we set off into the darkness, the headlights cutting through the night. But as we drove along the empty road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as if we were being watched, a sense of unease creeping over me with every passing mile. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I saw it, a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror, growing closer and closer with each passing second. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. We were being followed, pursued by someone in an old pickup truck that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Panic set in as I struggled to think of a way out of this nightmare. The road stretched out before us, empty and desolate, with no one around to help us. I urged my husband to drive faster, to lose our pursuer in the darkness, but it was no use. The pickup truck stayed hot on our tail, its headlights blinding in the darkness. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that we were in real danger. This wasn't just some random encounter on a lonely road. We were being targeted, hunted like animals by someone with sinister intentions. As the minutes stretched into hours, the tension in the car was palpable. We were all on edge, our eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror as we tried to anticipate our attacker's next move. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the pickup truck pulled alongside us, its driver glaring at us with eyes filled with malice. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this was no ordinary road rage incident. This person wanted to hurt us, to do us harm in ways that I couldn't even begin to imagine. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I urged my husband to keep driving, to do whatever it took to get us out of this alive. But as we sped down the empty road, the pickup truck stayed hot on our tail, its driver relentless in their pursuit. I felt a sense of desperation wash over me as I realized that there was no escaping this nightmare. We were trapped, with no one around to help us and nowhere to run. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw something up ahead that made my heart leap with relief. The lights of a gas station, glowing like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With renewed determination, I urged my husband to pull off the road and seek refuge in the safety of the gas station. As we pulled into the parking lot, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We were safe, at least for now, with the pickup truck nowhere in sight. But even as I breathed a sigh of relief, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. We were still in danger, still being hunted by someone with sinister intentions. With that thought weighing heavily on my mind, I huddled close to my family, praying that we could make it out of this alive. Luckily, as it reached morning, we hadn't seen him at all. We pulled back onto the road and got home safe. As I drove, my mind wandered, the events of the day replaying in my head like a broken record. I was tired, my eyelids heavy with exhaustion as I fought to stay awake behind the wheel. But just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw it, a pair of headlights in the distance, growing closer and closer with each passing second. At first, I didn't think anything of it. After all, it was a lonely road, and encountering another driver was not uncommon. But as the headlights drew nearer, I began to feel a sense of unease creeping over me. There was something about the way they moved, the way they seemed to be gaining on me with alarming speed. I glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that the other driver was tailgating me, their headlights blinding in the darkness. Panic set in as I struggled to think of a way out of this situation. I tried to speed up, to put some distance between us, but it was no use. The other driver stayed hot on my tail, their presence looming over me like a dark shadow. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was in real danger. This wasn't just some random encounter on a deserted highway. I was being targeted, hunted by someone with sinister intentions. As the minutes stretched into hours, the tension in the car was palpable. I was alone, with no one around to help me and nowhere to turn for assistance. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the other driver pulled alongside me, their face obscured by the darkness as they glared at me with eyes filled with malice. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that this person meant me harm, that they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew that I had to do something, anything, to get out of this alive. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons as I tried to call for help. But to my horror, I realized that I had no signal, no way of contacting anyone for assistance. Desperation set in as I struggled to come up with a plan. I tried to outmaneuver the other driver, to lose them in the darkness, but it was no use. They stayed hot on my tail, their presence a constant reminder of the danger I was in. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw something up ahead that made my heart leap with relief. The lights of a gas station, glowing like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With renewed determination, I urged my car forward, pushing it to its limits as I raced towards the safety of the gas station. I was safe at last, but I would never forget that night, not for as long as I live. I was responding to a disturbance call on the outskirts of town, the static of the police radio filling the silence of the night as I drove. The details of the call were vague, just reports of a loud commotion coming from an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. As I made my way down the dark, winding roads, a sense of unease settled over me. There was something about the call that didn't sit right with me, a feeling of foreboding that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. But I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to nerves. After all, I was a seasoned police officer, used to dealing with all sorts of situations. Whatever was waiting for me at the warehouse, I was sure I could handle it. As I approached the warehouse, I noticed something strange in my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights, following me at a distance. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, it wasn't uncommon for other drivers to be out on the road at this time of night. But as I continued to drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that the car behind me was following me deliberately, their presence a constant reminder of the danger I was in. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was being hunted, that whoever was behind the wheel of that car had sinister intentions. I tried to shake them off, to lose them in the darkness of the night, but it was no use. No matter how fast I drove or how many turns I made, they stayed hot on my tail, their headlights a constant reminder of the danger I was in. Panic began to set in as I struggled to come up with a plan. I reached for my radio, my fingers trembling as I called for backup, but there was no response. The static of the radio filled the car, mocking me with its silence. With nowhere to turn for help, I knew that I was on my own. I had to rely on my instincts, on years of training and experience, to get me out of this alive. As I approached the warehouse, the headlights behind me grew closer, the other car closing in with each passing second. I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to escape. With a sense of determination, I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a halt in front of the warehouse. I leaped out of the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the area for any sign of danger. But to my relief, there was no one there. The warehouse was dark and silent, its windows boarded up and its doors locked tight. I breathed a sigh of relief, my pulse slowing as I realized that I had escaped whatever danger was lurking in the darkness. But even as I tried to calm my racing heart, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever had been following me was still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With that thought weighing heavily on my mind, I made my way back to my car, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. As I reached the safety of my car and slammed the door shut, I called into the station and backup arrived shortly after. I was driving down a dark, deserted road in the dead of night, just trying to get my delivery done on time. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. But then, up ahead, I saw something strange, a figure standing right in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it might have been a lost hiker or something, but as I got closer, I could see that something was off. The figure was tall and shadowy, with a menacing aura that sent a shiver down my spine. And as I slowed down to get a better look, I saw that he was holding something in his hand, something long and sharp. I felt my heart start to race as I realized that this guy wasn't just out for a midnight stroll. He was armed, and he didn't look too friendly. I tried to think fast, wondering if I should just hit the gas and get the hell out of there. But something in me hesitated. What if this guy needed help? What if he was in trouble? I rolled down my window a crack and called out to him, trying to sound as friendly as possible. "Hey buddy, you okay?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. But instead of answering, the figure just stood there, staring at me with those cold, dead eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that this guy wasn't here for help. He was here for something else entirely. I could feel the panic rising inside me as I fumbled for my phone, trying to call for help. But as I looked down at the screen, I saw that I had no signal, just a blank screen staring back at me. I cursed under my breath, feeling a sense of dread wash over me as I realized that I was completely on my own out here. There was no one coming to rescue me, no one to save me from whatever this guy had planned. I glanced back up at the figure in the road, feeling a surge of fear as I saw him starting to move towards me. I could see the glint of metal in his hand, and I knew that I was in serious trouble. I had to think fast. I had to come up with a plan, or else I was as good as dead. I looked around frantically, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. And that's when I saw it, a tire iron lying on the passenger seat. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed it, clutching it tightly in my hand as I prepared to defend myself. The figure was getting closer now, his footsteps echoing loudly in the silence of the night. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. And then, just as he was about to reach the truck, I swung the tire iron with all my strength, striking him squarely in the chest. He let out a cry of pain and stumbled backwards, giving me just enough time to slam my foot on the gas and speed away into the night. I didn't stop until I was miles away, my heart still racing and my hands shaking with adrenaline. But as I looked back on the road behind me, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had survived, but I would never forget the terror of that night, or the sinister figure that had crossed my path. I was driving down a desolate stretch of highway, the only car on the road for miles. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt as I navigated the empty lanes. Suddenly, up ahead, I saw a car pulled over on the side of the road. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as I got closer, I noticed something strange. There was a figure standing beside the car, waving frantically at passing motorists. My first instinct was to keep driving, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. What if they were in trouble and needed help? I couldn't just leave them stranded out here in the middle of nowhere. So, against my better judgment, I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down my window. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out to the figure, trying to sound friendly but cautious. The figure turned towards me, and that's when I saw it. There was someone else in the car, lurking in the shadows, their face obscured by darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as a sense of unease washed over me. "Yeah, we're fine," the figure replied, their voice strained. "Just ran out of gas. Do you think you could give us a ride to the nearest gas station?" I hesitated for a moment, weighing my options. On one hand, I wanted to help them, but on the other hand, something about the situation felt off. But before I could make up my mind, the figure spoke again, their tone growing more insistent. "Please, we really need your help," they said, their voice tinged with desperation. "We won't take up much space, I promise." Against my better judgment, I agreed to give them a ride. I figured it was the least I could do to help someone in need, and besides, I could always turn around and drop them off if things started to feel sketchy. As they climbed into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. But I pushed it aside, chalking it up to nerves and trying to focus on the task at hand. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional gust of wind rattling against the windows. But as we neared the nearest gas station, something strange happened. The figure in the back seat started to fidget, their movements growing more frantic with each passing moment. I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge their reaction, but their face remained hidden in the shadows. "Hey, are you okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. There was no reply, only the sound of heavy breathing and the rustle of fabric as the figure shifted in their seat. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I struggled to maintain control of my rapidly escalating fear. Just then, the figure in the back seat spoke, their voice low and menacing. "You shouldn't have stopped," they said, their words sending a chill down my spine. "Now you're going to regret it." Before I could react, they lunged forward, grabbing hold of the steering wheel and sending the car careening off the road. Panic surged through me as I fought to regain control, but it was no use. We were headed straight for the edge of the highway, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. With a sickening crunch, the car smashed into the guardrail, sending me flying forward into the dashboard. Pain exploded behind my eyes as the world spun around me, and I struggled to make sense of what was happening. But even as I fought to stay conscious, I knew one thing for certain. I was in serious trouble, and if I didn't find a way out of this situation fast, I was as good as dead. With every ounce of strength I had left, I clawed my way out of the wreckage and stumbled to my feet, my head spinning with pain and adrenaline. The figure from the back seat was nowhere to be seen, but I knew they couldn't be far. I scanned the area for any sign of movement, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to keep my wits about me. But as I looked around, I realized something even more terrifying. The car was teetering on the edge of a steep embankment, its front end precariously balanced over the edge. One wrong move, and it would plummet down into the darkness below, taking me with it. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. I reached out and grabbed hold of the nearest tree, using it as leverage to pull myself away from the edge. But as I did, I heard a sound behind me, a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. I turned around slowly, my heart racing as I braced myself for whatever horror awaited me. And that's when I saw it. The figure from the back seat was standing there, their face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage as they advanced towards me, their intentions clear. I knew then that I had to fight for my life. With a primal scream, I launched myself at the figure, throwing punch after punch as I fought to overpower them. But they were too strong, too relentless in their pursuit of violence. Blow after blow rained down on me, each one sending shockwaves of pain through my battered body. I fought with everything I had, but it wasn't enough. In the end, I was no match for the sheer brutality of my attacker. As darkness closed in around me, I knew that this was it. This was how I was going to die, alone and afraid on the side of a deserted highway, at the hands of someone I had tried to help. But even as the world faded to black, I refused to give up hope. I refused to let my attacker win. And so, with one last defiant breath, I vowed to myself that I would never stop fighting, no matter what horrors awaited me on the other side.